Okay, I've got a lot to show you with Unity, and it's an amazing engine. And one of the important things to be able to design in a game is managing all the different assets that you want to try to load. And if you load a large number, it's going to be slowing things down on your computer because it's using up a lot of resources. So with this demonstration, the first thing I'm just going to do is show what happens when we load it up and start playing. So right now, the only objects I have is a scene called loader. So it's going to dynamically create a bunch of other scenes. And the only thing I have to start with in the loader scene is my camera, which has a script that I've set up to move around with an Xbox controller. And then just a basic directional light that was there at the start when you first open up, so it's default. And then something called the binary space partitioner. So that script is what's going to create 16 other areas. Just to show you that you can create anything you want dynamically, except I did hit a wall trying to load a script itself dynamically to another object. So when you try to press play on your game within the Unity engine, it's going to check whether your scripts have compiled without errors. And if any of them have errors, it won't begin simulating your game. So obviously it's not going to let us just load in a script that it hasn't checked yet. Now, I could be wrong about that. I did a lot of searching and I couldn't find anything to let me do it. If I want to be able to control whether objects in a scene can be loaded from assets, so if I go down to my project panel, I have a folder that I added called scenes. And I've created a couple of them, area 0, just to test things out. And inside of it, it's got this really big cube. If I go to my main scene and zoom out, see it right there. So it's pretty big. I think it's 50 by 50 units, just to be really clear that once it's loaded into the scene for my main scene, that we can see it. And what the binary space partitioner is going to do in its script is once I press play, it's a little bit easier to understand what's happening. It's just dynamically setting up 16 sections. I'm right at the origin. Over at the back corner, you can see a light green outline of a collider that I've created. And if I walk through that with the camera, you can see the 16 sections have different colored cubes set up. So I enter the area with the green ones. And then across this, there's another section that was dynamically set up as well with red cubes. So if I go to cross this, you can see that area 0 is loaded. So I could have many, many objects, but hitting the limits of what I could load in that one area, crossing the collision, I could just load them all up dynamically. So if I turn around and then walk back through the other direction and look back, the object has been unloaded from my main scene. So this is the kind of thing you want to set up in order to be able to create areas in an open world where your computer is using up as much as you can, or you don't usually want to try to load up everything that's possible on a system in order to maximize its use. But you do want to try to load a bunch of stuff to try to make a scene that's as realistic as you can, or has the best kind of graphics that you can. And then when you move away from that area, you no longer need those assets, and you can unload them and load up another area. So since it's dynamic like this, you don't have to have a load screen to switch between areas and have the player wait. So when it's loading, it's actually asynchronous. So if there were a lot of things, a lot of other assets being loaded for a scene, if I walk back through, then you might have smaller sections like this set up so that you could slowly load things up, give it a little bit more time for maybe a few side areas to load asynchronously while the player is absorbed in exploring the current area that they're in. Now there are some issues with what I have so far because it took me quite a while to go through the documentation, and it looks like all I could find for loading objects like this dynamically was older examples that people had done where instead of loading all the objects in a scene and unloading all the objects in a scene, instead they added all the objects to some empty parent object. And then when they wanted to unload it, they would just delete that parent and it would delete all of the children with it, which I think would be a lot more work to try to set it up that way. And Unity seems like it already has new functionality for just loading a scene like this. But I still have to figure out a little bit more with collisions, because if I walk backwards through the collision detector, it just loads the scene again. As you can see, the other big cube landing on top of the first one that loaded. So it's not perfect yet, but you get the main idea. Now, it would be nice to dynamically load the collision detector, the green geometry that you see, and then separate the 16 areas. So if I go, I don't know if I still have Unity, the rest of Unity available. I'm going to exit out of that and then set it so that it doesn't maximize. And then open it back up. You can see it's dynamically loading those 16 areas. And if I go just to my main editor window, you can see the different 16 colored areas. I can zoom out a bit more. So it is a little bit difficult to see the colors on the cubes. And the only thing I'm really doing with those cubes is showing you that you can dynamically create many, many objects within a script. The environment scene has the terrain, so I'm still learning a little bit more about setting up terrains for walking around on the floor. And then the areas you can see have many, many clones of a prefab. So unfortunately, if you try to unload a scene that you've created dynamically, it deletes the entire scene. But if you created it dynamically, then there's no reason why you can't just dynamically create it again. So you could do the same kind of thing with triggers, go through a collision and just do a bunch of calculations and load your objects by dynamically creating them, instead of loading scenes where you've already got things described in files like Area 0. I just exited my game. But when I look at Area 0, all I have is just one prefab inside of it. No lights, no camera, because I don't want it to load duplicates of those objects in my main loader scene. It'll take a lot for me to go through and describe what I've done with this file. So I'm going to provide it for everyone to explore. And I think it would take a little bit more time to look at setting up collisions so that you could partition your game world. And then every time you're walking through one side, it's not that you want to dynamically load up the objects immediately in front of that division, but you would want to load up the adjacent areas surrounding it. So it would take a little bit of time to set up something like that. And I think it would help to dynamically load things. But if you're creating your scenes and saving them separately like this, then you can start to load and unload them in your main game. And that way you can get a lot more performance out of your open worlds. But I think I'm going to end the video right there. And I'm going to have another video just explaining the code that goes along with this file, because I have maybe about 3 different scripts, one for the controlling the camera with an Xbox controller, another script for loading things up dynamically with many scenes, and then another script for the collider so that when I walk through it, it's loading area 0 scene and unloading it.